It's no secret that fewer reporters are covering state government today than there were 10, 5, or even 3 years ago. Reporters often lament the decline in their numbers, but it's not often you hear from the folks being covered about what they are seeing. Today, we're going to do just that. I'm Bruce Moll from CommonWealth Magazine, and I'm joined by Tim Buckley, one of Governor Charlie Baker's longest-serving aides. He is currently the governor's chief of staff and previously served as his senior advisor. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bruce.
How would you say the press is doing covering state government in Massachusetts?
How are they doing? They're doing well, but you're right. There is a discernible difference in what it's like working with these reporters and with the state media. When it comes to covering government and politics. Now that media core has shrunk down some, I've been working in communications and politics and government for almost 12 years now, and you notice that change going back to 2011 when I really got started. There is a significant reduction in the number of people covering this, and also in the way that people cover state and local government and politics has absolutely changed. And you're right about the reduction in size. And I think that's led to a couple of changes. I think there's oftentimes slightly more likely to see a bit of a herd mentality. When there are fewer reporters, I think there's less bandwidth to cover more topics. So if there's a big major story, everyone's going to cover that story. I think there's a little bit less analysis and a little less nuance out there on the big stories. And there's less institutional memory. When new people are coming in, when you lose some of the people that have been around for a long time. It's not anyone's fault, but it's hard to ignore. At the same time, there are new reporters coming in and they bring a new perspective and a new set of experiences. So there's also some upside there with some of the turnover as well.
So there was obviously a big story just recently wrapped up. Well, it's an ongoing story, but it recently wrapped up this 1 month shutdown of the Orange Line on the MBTA. Lots of coverage of that. How did you think that went?
Yeah. I think the Orange Line diversion coverage is a good example of when there's a smaller media core, when you get some of that herd mentality happening. It seemed like even before the first bus ever left the garage, there was an angle that was decided with the media core on this one, and maybe it was deserved given some of the T's past issues. Maybe it wasn't. I think the end result of the diversion would say that it wasn't. But let me do a better job of explaining that. The Orange Line coverage before day one even came around, the diversion on the Orange Line was treated almost like a hurricane, was days offshore of the Massachusetts coast. We had live shots from MBTA stations before anything even happened. We had live coverage of inside news vans driving around the future route that the buses would take for the diversion. There was coverage out there before anyone even boarded the first diversion bus about a circle of hell that could be coming. Some people jumped on Twitter and some of these reporters even jumped on Twitter to predict doom and gloom. You see some of this from opinion writers oftentimes, but you usually don't see something like this from the news side. Before anything has even happened. Some reporters were even kind of, openly mocking how this was all going to go by posting jokes on Twitter about the MBTA system, and it was covered in scribbles and emojis. And I get it. The T is not without its faults, but on the coverage of this event, a real herd mentality set in. And then I think that colored the coverage of the event as it played out. Some of the voices that whether it be local officials or transportation advocates, when they were quoted on this, were using words like it's going to be chaos. People said it was going to be the biggest challenge to face their city or town since COVID. People warned of untold economic harm to come, and these things were covered. But we didn't really see a lot of that, and those voices were not questioned after the fact. And so that's how I think it tainted some of the coverage. And some of the other examples how it tainted the coverage, I think, would be I think I saw some of the goalposts for the MBTA get moved. The big test for the diversion was going to be day one, but that was a Saturday or a Sunday. It was a weekend, pretty slow day on the roads and on the T. So then the big test became the first work day, and that went more or less smoothly, as smooth as things like this can go. So then the next big test was going to be the first work day after Labor Day. And then when that went okay, the next big test was the first day when BPS students went back to school. So I think that's a good example of how a herd mentality has set in at times on some topics.
So pushing back on that a little bit, I don't disagree that there might have been a mentality about it, but I sort of wonder, some of that was self-generated by your administration. I don't know if you remember the press conference prior to the shutdown. Jonathan Gulliver is really memorable. He's the state highway commissioner, and got up and basically scared the hell out of everybody that it's going to be a traffic nightmare if you try to drive along any of the routes the buses are going to be on. He basically said it was going to be a bad scene from a road traffic perspective.
Yeah.
He even had, if you're even thinking about going down there, don't do it. Don't do it.
Sure.
And I sort of wonder whether some people thought that was the Baker administration's way of saying, stay away, and make it sound really bad. And then you guys perform well, and you look like you're great. Are you playing the game both ways?
You want to send in instances like this, the administration, I think just about anyone in public office wants to send a very clear, direct message. It's very hard to get a lot of different points across. You're right. There was a message sent about avoiding car travel in the areas of the diversion. We also said people should take the T, the commuter rail, the alternative that was set up, and take the buses as well if the commuter rail options didn't work out. We said avoid driving. But what I was talking about was people just were predicting utter chaos on the buses, on the alternative service that was set up across the whole thing. And again, the thing about moving the goalposts, I think, is true, whether or not Gulliver sent the message around avoiding driving in those areas. But again, it's not perfectly clear cut. I mean, there was also some great coverage of what was going on at the Orange Line, and I think some of the individuals that were quoted, that were covered, who were experiencing what the diversion was like. You saw both sides. I think there was some coverage of students who were waking up extra early to get to their first day of school. It's great context. It's good to see that people were taking the steps to be prepared. And there was great coverage around all the work that went into planning this diversion, from the state to the T to the DOT to the city of Boston. There was also, there was some interesting coverage in there as well. So I don't want it to seem like I'm summing the whole thing up. There was some prediction of doom and gloom that I thought was kind of unlike any other big event that we've had around here.
And you felt that this herd mentality, I want to talk a little bit more about that. Because to some degree, when you have fewer people covering what's going on, you have limited resources, so you have to decide what's important, what's relevant that day. And a story like that would suck a lot of the oxygen out of the room, I think, naturally, because it was also in August and September, typically a time when there's not a whole lot else going on. At the end of August and the beginning of September is the return to work and everything. But I guess it's I would urge you to step back a little bit, maybe aside from the orange line, and sort of say, what does this herd mentality mean for just daily coverage of what's going on at the State House?
Yeah.
Because there still are quite a few reporters, not as many as there were by any stretch, but there's still quite a few reporters nosing around. But there's a lot to cover. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think even the state government picked up this massive responsibility of responding to a pandemic. And that became obviously an entire subject area of its own. And the reporters around here on the State House had to pivot and cover that in addition to, but the state government didn't stop. Campaigns didn't stop, elections didn't stop. So people were pulled in 1,000 different directions, and we were in here actually day after day. I saw reporters around here, the corps that was assigned to cover the administration during that time. I saw them as almost as much as I probably saw them more often than I saw my own mom, who just lives 30 minutes outside of Boston. And they did an amazing job. But one of the things that I think has happened with the effect of one of the effects of fewer reporters, like I said earlier, was less analysis, less nuance to some of these stories. And I think what happens there is you want to go and get reaction from experts when there's things happening around here. And I think when there are fewer people and they have less bandwidth to dive into issues, sometimes the noisiest critics are often the ones who are more often quoted. They're right there. They probably make good copy, make for good headlines. But I think what we've seen, and actually this kind of played out, I think, with the primary election season. We may hear about some of the more strident or more extreme voices in the news more often, but what happens in reality doesn't really reflect that. So with less coverage, with less nuance of a lot of these state and local things, you get less variety in opinions. You hear from fewer voices. The coverage contains fewer perspectives. And you saw in the primaries where more moderates won and kind of beat out expectations. You wouldn't have seen that coming, I think, from maybe some of the more strident, more extreme voices that are in the coverage more often than not. And I'm not saying critics should not be covered. They should be covered, and state government and elected officials should have to answer for what those critics are saying. I'm saying that maybe some of the more perspectives, other perspectives aren't always covered as well.
So let me ask you a little bit about how the Baker administration frames the news coming out of the administration. You have a guy that's governor who's very effective at dealing with the press. He's comfortable answering questions. He doesn't get flustered very often by the questioning, and handles it pretty well. From my perspective, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like the entire administration funnels everything as much as it can through him or through his press operation. Now, this was heavily pronounced during COVID because he was giving briefings every day, and that was the main source of news. Most of the rest of the government was, you didn't bump into them on the street, you didn't see them around, blah, blah, blah. But it continues. If I want to find out what's happening at a certain agency and you go call them, they don't respond quickly. It's not like they're on their own to say whatever they want. And sometimes it's easier just to try and go get the governor speaking about something at a separate event and get him to answer a lone question about that thing, rather than go to the agency that would be in charge of it. Is that on purpose that you're trying to funnel everything through sort of one voice?
No, and it depends on the topic. Let's pick COVID, for example. It's a very important issue that affected a lot of people very personally, very worried about their health, their safety, very worried about the effects that restrictions were going to have on their businesses, on their livelihoods, and of their friends and their family. We had to be consistent. And putting every single epidemiologist on this in from the Department of Public Health on the phone with every other reporter who calls runs the risk of sending conflicting and maybe confusing messaging. So there is a real value in being consistent and speaking from one or two voices. You know, during the pandemic, we had the governor, it's true. We also had the lieutenant governor available. We had the Secretary of Health and Human Services almost every single time. And then we would have the commissioners or department heads available. But COVID aside, you just brought up Jonathan Gulliver, head of highway, was available to talk about what was going on at the Orange Line. You had a number of folks from the MBTA. I saw the pictures, saw you were there, Bruce, on Sunday, I think, of the Orange Line wrap-up press conference. You had the Secretary of Transportation, you had the governor, you had general manager of the T, all available there at that point in time. So I think we do make some of the other leaders in the administration available.
You do, but again, that's a major event that you guys are, truth be told, you're sort of saying, hey, we're done, we got the job done, everything worked.
Yeah.
And so you come out and make a presentation. I'm talking about the day-to-day stories that say you want to know how the government is handling this return of tax cap money.
Yeah.
You can call DOR and get a background statement that's probably gone through 4 or 5 filters before it comes back to you, or you can go to Administration and Finance and get a similar response, often slow because it has to go through various chains of command, or you can just go ask, you can go get the governor and ask him, and he'll give you his take right there.
Yeah.
Now, that's a time-consuming way, and it sort of hurts the nuance of the thing, because usually you only get one question of the governor, and then if he wants to answer it, he'll answer it. If he doesn't, he'll talk about that and other things and delay the answer a little bit. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, in some cases, the administration is not that quick to respond. I've been told it's because they want to make sure they get it right. So everything is double checked, triple checked, what have you. But like under Dukakis, Frank Keefe, who was the Secretary of Administration and Finance, loved to have press conferences all by himself. He would invite reporters in and chat about this and that and what have you.
Yeah.
Your cabinet secretaries don't do that very often. It's the governor that speaks for the administration, pretty much. That's what I'm sort of getting at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I could go back and list a number of instances where secretaries and commissioners are available alongside the governor on the day-to-day basis. I guess on the ad hoc basis of kind of one-offs with reporters. I mean, that's not intentional. I think it's possibly a more of just a reality of scheduling. Making every single commissioner available every time an inquiry comes in is not always possible.
And so circling back to the way things are covered, the lack of nuance, the herd mentality, do you think that, I mean, you talked about how that played out in the coverage of the Orange Line shutdown.
Yeah.
So how do you think that played out at the end of the Orange Line shutdown? Do you think the administration got enough credit for the work that was done, or was that covered? I mean, so this buildup, I think what I'm hearing you say is there was no follow-up to say, well, these groups that said it was going to be a disaster, that didn't really happen.
Yeah. Look, there was one major outlet that was organizing all of its Orange Line diversion coverage under a banner that read 30 days to save the MBTA. 30 days are up. I don't know if anyone's issued a verdict that the MBTA has been saved. And the Orange Line diversion was not about saving the MBTA. No, I think there was very good coverage of the final day. And I think just about every outlet that covered the Orange Line diversion at one point or another checked in on the completion of the work. But what I was raising before was, before the first bus even left the first garage, there seemed to be predictions and an angle chosen around how it was going to go. And when it didn't go that way initially, the goalposts kept getting moved, like I said. But but on the wrap up, I think most of the outlets that covered the Orange Line at one point in time checked back in for the completion. And it's not to say that this is done and done. The MBTA absolutely deserves scrutiny, not on just the Orange Line, but on following through on the FTA directives. And the MBTA is committed to a very public process on how they're going to follow through on that. And we expect it to be covered aggressively. It's a very important topic. But the run up to the Orange Line and then the early days of it, I thought really stood out as an example of that herd mentality. But there's also there are other effects here of the smaller media core, and specifically when you lack the regional coverage. There is no the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, the Springfield Republican, some of these other papers that used to have a one or two people even up here in the State House not that long ago, don't have a person up here on the third floor anymore. And I think there's a real downside to that. In a vacuum of local news, you see some of these dubious news sources and sites pop up. It's hard to discern between fact and opinion or news and opinion. Some of these websites pop up are just collections of press releases. And I think that turns readers and residents and voters off from trying to participate in that local state government media coverage. And I think you're left with more national news in its place. Voters and residents, by and large, do not approve of the way things go in Washington, D.C. And so when you get more of that national coverage, I think it turns people off from trying to watch and learn and read more about it. It cuts the other way too. The shrinking of the traditional outlets and the kind of transition over to more online outlets has opened up media to new people who probably never would have pursued a career in journalism in the first place. And that brings a new, fresh perspective and new eyes on things that are going around here. But it's hard to disagree that lack of that regional coverage. I think when that was lost up here, people who like us who get covered lose the ability to go to another source or another outlet and present another angle. With fewer outlets, you got fewer possibilities.
Yeah, and so that implies that some outlets are just sort of, they've got a story and they're sticking to it no matter what you have to say. Is that what you're saying?
It's not that simple, but at times on some topics, yeah, it can feel that way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So is there any answer to this? We're in a campaign season where most of the leading candidates are refusing to debate their opponents who are running against them for office, or limiting it in very strict ways. And that would have just been unheard of a decade ago, I think. And just no one would even try that because the media then would have raised a huge ruckus. It's sort of bubbling up now, but I just sort of wonder whether something's shifted here, and
Yeah.
we're at a disadvantage on the press side to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And I couldn't imagine, I worked on the two, the 2010 campaign and the 14 campaign. I worked at the state party before that. Debates were part of the process, even all the way down to your candidate running for state rep. And for us, I should say us, at the time when I was working at the party, we were most of the time challenging an incumbent. Your debates were your only opportunity to break through and get some of that coverage in the local paper or the local radio station. They were huge opportunities. You're absolutely right. And I was just reading a national story about, I think it might have been the New York Times, about candidates for U.S. Senate to Congress to governor from one side of the country to the other, seemingly to all decide to reject the idea of doing debates. It's a bit of a chicken and the egg, right? You need to have a strong and well followed media corps to be critical of decisions like that. But at the same time, if you don't have people participating in that process, it's not going to be strong and it's not going to be well followed. I don't know what the answer is. One of the things I come back to is maybe I think a lot of people have a lot going on in their lives, and maybe some type of refresher on how important it is to have good, strong local state government journalism. A reminder on how important that role is to keeping government in check. I don't know if you do that through the education system or what, but it's such an important role, and it is diminished over time, and I don't know exactly what to do about it.
Well, it sounds like we'll have to have other conversations like this down the road. But Tim, I want to thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Happy to be here. I enjoyed it.
And to our listeners, we'll see you again next week. Thank you.